Okay, Mayor Todd Gloria, thank you for being here. Let's just jump right into questions. I know it's early in your term and you got a lot of issues to handle. I'd like to start with climate change. Obviously, you wrote the city's climate action plan, and we and others praised you in your State of the City speech for some refreshingly realistic language on a lot of things, including homelessness, which you and I have jousted about in years past when you were city council president and I was a columnist. But let me ask you about your decision to keep the baseline data for emissions, which Joshua Emerson Smith at our newspaper pointed out was flawed, and the city agreed it was flawed back in 2017. Yet one of your early days included a press release where you were touting this improvement, which isn't really improvement once you look at the numbers. So I guess my question to you is, why did you decide when you were being so refreshingly realistic, and thank you for that, to not be so in that case, and when will you make changes to that baseline?
Okay, so fair question, and Chris and I covered a little bit of this the other day, but there was a line in the State of the City acknowledging that there is this issue about data and baselines, and the Climate Action Plan has a 5-year updating process that we're starting now that will look at this issue and make a determination on whether or not to do different baselines, different data, different metrics. When we wrote this plan back in 2014, 2015, we had recognized that the environment would be changing, no pun intended, the circumstances around us would be changing, and we need to update the plan to reflect that. And I think Joshua's reporting, as well as others who have raised this issue in the past, is worthy of consideration for that update. So you may see a change as a part of the update process, which again is starting now. In terms of why that was included, to the extent that there's a discrepancy that's there, we probably could have did a better job pointing that out. Perhaps, what we were doing is, what has been done, which is annual reporting, which to your point, this has been raised before. I think I would have preferred, looking back, to have acknowledged that in some way and then explained explicitly what we're doing in 2021 to address it. And so it's a big city. There's a lot of things going on, but you have my commitment to make sure that in this update process, we fully consider that. And if appropriate, and if we get general agreement to modify those baselines.
And a quick follow-up, staying on climate, moving to the franchise fee agreement. Thank you for writing an op-ed. It'll be in our paper soon, along with one from SDG&E as you go through this negotiations process. How, if it is SDG&E or whoever it is that wins this extension of a franchise fee agreement, how would you ensure that the city kind of continues to or increases the speed with which it weans itself off fossil fuels? How do you assure San Diegans that that's going to be a part of this?
Well, when I think about general strategy on the franchise agreement, and forgive me for being maybe a little bit guarded because this is a negotiation. It's an extremely important one. And I have been, and I mean this truly, all options are on the table. We're not going to give up any of the city's negotiating leverage as we deal with either the incumbent or a new provider. But to your question, when I think about what my objectives are, broadly speaking, it's the best deal for the city and its ratepayers, and one that helps us advance our climate action plan goals. And I think that no matter who ends up being our provider, or if it's municipalized, whatever we're doing should be advancing the goals of the climate action plan. I would say that we have already done something in this regard regarding the city's position with regard to moving to more renewable energy. The Public Utilities Commission's decision last week, which helps the viability of our CCA, our San Diego Community Power, does go a long way to helping that. Mindful, and we're going to have to do a lot of public education. And as you know, we're starting these public forums this week, I believe, on the franchise agreement. The agreement is about the sticks and the poles, the wires. The CCA is about where we get our energy. And while these two are not completely divorced from one another, the fact is the success of the CCA will be what can help us transition to cleaner energy sources. The franchise agreement, again, can help us facilitate some of that stuff. But ultimately, the CCA is a focus of this administration, and that PUC decision last week takes us significantly closer to being able to implement the 100% renewable energy goal for our city.
And just really quickly, so a shorter term time frame is what you're hoping for, or can you give us thoughts on that? I know you don't want to negotiate in public.
On franchise?
Yeah.
It's going to be a negotiation. I mean, I think that either that we had a city consultant that the previous council and administration procured that recommended 20 years. I've read the report. It's actually, I would encourage San Diegans to read it. I think that we're going to be spending a fair amount of time talking about the city's franchise agreement. It's a very accessible document. I'm not an energy expert, but even I could navigate that document to understand the risks, the opportunities in there, and that consultant came to the 20-year conclusion. Previous administration was supportive of that. I think it's something less than the 50 years that we've typically have had. How low do we go? That's going to depend on a number of things. One concern that I think we can't lose sight of is the fact that the kinds of investments that have been made here locally have allowed us to be spared some of the worst wildfires, at least in recent years, that we've seen in other parts of the state. And those sorts of investments do need longer term horizons in order to recoup those costs. I understand and I respect that. And so it's juggling multiple priorities. Obviously, the climate is a key consideration that I have and the city has committed itself to, but also protecting San Diegans from wildfires. And again, the hardening of the infrastructure, the ability to shut down grid in a micro fashion, not a macro fashion like what you see in Northern California. These are things that sort of suggest that you need a longer time frame than maybe a year or 2 or 5, right? So again, a negotiation, but just trying to give you the parameters and what I think is going to drive this conversation. Again, acknowledging the consultant's recommendation of 20 years.
Yeah, it's complex. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Mayor, can you talk about your plan to get San Diego back on track after the pandemic is over, which is hopefully soon?
Yeah, hopefully soon. Well, a couple of things. We are inserting ourselves wherever we can in the vaccination conversation, as well as the need to, limit the spread. The first executive order I issued was to support our hospitals and try and protect public health. We are working now with the county collaboratively on the vaccination superstation in East Village, which in about a week and a half has vaccinated 35,000 San Diegans. Not nearly enough to get us back to good, but I think is remarkable progress in a short amount of time. We need more of that. I'm heartened by the second superstation opening today down in the South Bay, which let's remember that's some of our hardest hit communities and one that we have to be focused on as we recover. Christy, too, I think beyond the mechanics of defeating COVID, I think your question is about what do you do after that, right? And we'll be issuing a second executive order trying to focus on what we can do to support businesses. I believe we'll be doing that sometime next week. We want to perfect it, but I think there are ways that the city can further support businesses during this difficult time. We've already been doing that with, I think modest grant programs out of the city's resources, advocating for funding at the state and federal level. And we can do more with regard to facilitating outdoor dining, waiving of permits, a general can-do attitude at development services would go a long way, recognizing that that's the city department that most small businesses interact with. And their willingness to engage, be responsive, flexible, and swift in decision-making would be critical to helping our recovery. Back during the campaign, I spent a significant amount of time with a number of San Diego leaders, including Congressman Scott Peters, and then Chamber Vice President, now my Chief of Staff, Paula Avila, to come up with a plan for what we would do. We call it Back to Work SD, and it's comprehensive. Everything from working with our school district, which we had a good meeting last week before her ascension, or at least nomination to Assistant Secretary, what we could do collaboratively, whether that's testing and vaccination stations at local elementary schools, or if the city is able to procure its own doses of the vaccine, trying to work with the school district to prioritize teachers in order to get our schools open sooner rather than later. We have a host of ideas that are out there. We're bringing an item to council next week around eviction moratorium extension. We received $43 million yesterday from the federal government, which we can use to help pay back rent that is owed by tenants in San Diego. I'm going on a list, and I apologize. It's a lot of stuff. I guess the short answer to your question, Christy, is that the city does have a role in this. I think a lot of it's fairly dull stuff, like advocating in Sacramento and Washington. How swiftly we can implement this on the ground in the case of getting that check yesterday from the feds, and then having an item at council on Tuesday shows the seriousness with which we are taking this. And again, working collaboratively with the county to do what we can. You know, they are a recipient of vaccines. They're working with UCSD to inject them. Our firefighter EMTs are also out there doing the vaccination. Our police officers are providing traffic control. So this is a collaborative effort that will, to your point, hopefully get us through this relatively soon, and then we can focus on the economic renewal parts. And while a lot of it's maybe boring, there's some things I think are really exciting. The Fifth Avenue Promenade, while a long-held idea of the community, I think that could be an exciting way to tell people and signal people it's safe, right? That this is, you come out here, enjoy this new amenity, support this part of the business. Is really the heart of our hospitality industry. So it's ideas that are maybe a little more aspirational like that, to more technical stuff like our housing commission will be issuing an application soon for this additional tenant relief and all things in between. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And again, that back to work SD plan is a fairly comprehensive document, and we have a staff member that is dedicated to try and implement that plan.
Thank you for that. Just one follow-up. Has the pandemic fundamentally changed your thinking on any single topic, or a way that you might approach your job?
Well, it's certainly the thing I've spent the most time on. The 42 days I've been here, there's not a day that we're not working on this. I think what it's done, it maybe not changed, but strengthened some opinions that I have. We issued the executive order around enforcement. That is received interesting responses, and a lot of it fairly vitriolic. And I appreciate the editorial board's support for that position. I'll tell you, I was touring an ICU on Tuesday and witnessing in person the carnage of this virus was reaffirming of the need for that executive order, no matter the anger and frustrations that people have shared since then. And that's also informed by the healthcare professionals that were there, who they may not be on social media, they may not be in my DMs, but they were unequivocal in their support for the executive order, and appreciative of the effort to support them, to back them up. They have created a situation where 70% of the patients I saw that day are going to survive. 30% are not, but 70% will, and that's a heck of a lot better than it was last spring. So it's strengthened my resolve to support them. Another thing that's done, Christy, and this, I think, getting to where we were starting a moment ago, is the strengthening the belief in the need for experienced professionals in government. It shouldn't have taken nearly a year to have a president say that you should wear a mask, and that's your patriotic duty to do so. It shouldn't have taken nearly a year to have a national response on the pandemic, and yet that's what we've had, and the results of that are obvious to everyone. A lot of people have spent a lot of time talking about vilifying people's work in public service. And I think that what we've seen for the last 4 years has shown what that does. And I think particularly the virus has illustrated what it is to have amateurs running a government, and the difference that it will have, that having experienced professionals will make in resolving this pandemic.
Thank you.
Mayor, I wanted to ask you about this Commission on Police Practices.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's still budgets to deal with, an executive director to deal with, and some other components of what that's going to look like, but what do you really want it to look like versus just a police review board, as we've seen in the past?
Again, yeah, what I was going to say is the voters approved this thing, so it isn't what I want. I got to implement it. And I want to be extremely clear. We are facing a significant financial crisis here. I mean, the budget deficit is enormous and it is growing. That said, I am completely committed to fully and faithfully implementing Measure B. I do that knowing that we have a financial deficit of really large proportions, and that saying that is at least $1 million, if not more. But I hope that not only respecting democracy, right, and the overwhelming majority of San Diegans that approve Measure B, but also my commitment, my administration's commitment to holding police officers accountable for the work that they do in our community. I think your question is beyond that. What do I want to see, right? Because we again, we'll fully implement that. The voters blessed it. That's what our work is here to do. I think what we have to do is a couple of things. And you always sort of start with the end in mind, right? I would like San Diego to be a national leader when it comes to policing in the 21st century. I think what we have seen in the last year is a real consensus amongst people that we want policing to be a bit different, right? That there's a consensus to acknowledge the bias that there is in policing and in really all things, right? Like, you did some recent coverage about fire department, right? So, and this is not curtailed to any one department. That we need to root that out where we can, that when it happens, that we hold people accountable, and that we're continually improving in the way that we serve our neighborhoods. So how do we do that? Well, we have to continually look at policies of the city. We have a number of suggestions from the community about policies they'd like to see changed. I think the one that I think most fully sketched out in the state of the city was leading with with mental health professionals with our homeless rather than with law enforcement. And so that would be an example of updating, realigning, matching law enforcement for the 21st century. Laura, I think the place for you to keep an eye on would be our Office of Race and Equity. You mentioned the recruitment for the police commission work, but we are also in the field right now, and appreciate if you all put a plug in there for people who are qualified to send their resumes to the city of San Diego. We're doing a national search for that position, and it speaks to that point I was making a moment ago. It's not just about the police department. It's really about everything the city does, and frankly, what the city generally can do to be more thoughtful when it comes to these issues of equity generally, but discrimination specifically. We'll implement Measure B faithfully. We're going to review policies and procedures and update them with input from the public. We will hold people accountable. I'm hopeful that we can be supportive of legislation in Sacramento. My 4 years of experience there, things are going to get passed. It can be done with our input or without it. I'd much rather have San Diego's input into legislation and making sure that it's stuff that is well informed by what's going on the ground. And then this Office of Race and Equity will try and expand this conversation beyond just law enforcement to the other areas of the city. And this is where I really need to drive home the fact that there is systemic racism in our housing economy, in our economic development strategies, in our education system. And while that's a pretty heavy charge for the entire Office of Race and Equity, you get my point that there's plenty of places that we got to get into. Measure B is a good running start to making changes for law enforcement, but there's a lot more work to be done to become the equitable city that San Diegans, again, in the last year, I think have come to a consensus that they want to see improvement on.
I appreciate that, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to ask you a little bit about how, what grade would you give the police chief, the current police chief, on how he's handled a lot of these issues? He's been very quiet through the Black Lives Matter movement, other than the chokehold discussion, and there's no community policing anymore around here. What grade would you give him?
I want to answer your question directly because I think you deserve that. It's a very direct question. It's hard because I think it's not. I think I know we are still in a position of understanding of informing him of what my expectations are, and seeing whether or not he can meet them. I believe he can. I've known Dave for a long time. I think at his core, he's a decent man. He has a different boss now, a boss with different expectations, it's on me to be clear with him about what I want from our police department. Again, that objective I mentioned a moment ago, and then seeing how he executes upon it. I'm hesitant to judge his past performance because there's a lot that goes on every day in the city that you don't always know about. I think 42 days in, he and I are in daily communication with one another. The best way I can phrase it, it's a big city. When there are folks in the streets in Pacific Beach, we were also discovering a body in La Jolla, right? This is the kind of stuff that job entails. What I would say is that, to your point about quietness, I don't think that there's a benefit in being quiet in this stuff right now. that people really are looking for leadership and direction. And a lot of that falls on my shoulders, and I welcome and I signed up for that responsibility. I also believe it comes from the chief as well, not just to the community, but to the people that he supervises and oversees. There was the video that came out the day I was sworn in with language that reminded me of junior high. We still don't know for sure that that's a member of his department, but you recognize while being outspoken about these issues is something that the police chief needs to be. I will point out that he did make a strong statement that day. I'm looking for more of that. And I'm looking for a clear articulation of from a law enforcement professional about what changes, reforms that he can support. I know what I am interested in, but I also recognize that I haven't worn the badge, driven a patrol car, and had to do this work. So I think between the two of us, we have to figure it out. And it's still, we're still early in this process. And I respect that we have to deepen this relationship and really understand my expectations and how he's executing upon them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
On the subject of the budget deficit, we heard in the State of the City, you were saying there may be some really difficult decisions ahead. We all saw the pension news this week. I'm wondering what we can expect from you and what kind of your priorities are when it comes to the budget.
Thank you, Abby. I should just share with you the $150 million. It's likely to get bigger. Absent additional federal or state relief, we're going to be in that position of making difficult choices. There is reason for hope. Obviously, the Biden-Harris administration has taken office. 2 Senate seats in Georgia went Democratic. And so some of these things that were not possible back in December when the most recent relief bill was passed and cities were excluded, that there is hope for some additional relief, recognizing that what we're in is not a situation necessarily of our own making. This is really a result of the pandemic and the need to take, extreme actions in order to protect lives. How that's playing out is, a real hit to our hospitality industry, which is, a major contributor to the city's financial resources. And, this is, it's more acute than people would have anticipated in March, in June, July, and in December when we arrived. So this is going to be rough. To answer your question, Abby, we're still putting things together. I think you're aware that we've asked departments for reductions, all departments, and we're sort of evaluating that looks like. Going forward, I mean, there are the obvious, and I won't say easy, but solutions, things like hiring freezes, eliminating vacant positions, deferring of capital projects, reserve holidays, et cetera, that you can do. My initial read of the situation is that would be insufficient to match our obligation to balance the city's budget. And so that's when you start getting into reductions. Whether that's, reductions to things that people love, like libraries and rec centers, to things that we absolutely need, our police department and our fire department. I mean, these are all things that we have to put on there. My commitment is to be as transparent as possible. That's what the State of the City was about. Making those difficult choices are never easy by definition, but I think it's made easier when people are being, in positions like mine, are being open and honest with folks about the situation. It would have done me no good to spend 25 minutes telling San Diegans how wonderful everything is, to come back with a budget proposal the following month that didn't reflect that. So I appreciate the chance to be able to lay things out, hopefully in a digestible format. I want to just maybe, if I can, just put some hope on this. We've been here before. When I arrived here in 2008, we're in the middle of the Great Recession. It's numbers that are, in the ballpark of where we are today. We were able to get through those times. It wasn't easy. Abby, to answer your question, you can look at some of the reductions that were made then to understand what could be on the table now. I want to, in terms of furthering that optimism, while the numbers and the dire circumstances are similar, the city's financial position is different in the sense that we have built significant reserves to address these challenges. That was not the case back in 2008 and 2009. We will surely rely upon some of those reserves. As chaired the city's budget committee for 6 years, where we helped build up those reserves, I'm confident that we can get through this difficult time. It will not be easy. And I'm afraid it won't be quick either. I think many of you know the city's financial indicators lag the general economy usually by about a year or so. And so we are going to be in for a rough couple of years is my guess. Again, my commitment to you is to be open, honest, transparent about the situation. We're lobbying now back in Washington to try and get resources for the city. I have a meeting later today with the governor to explain our circumstances and how the state's modest surplus at the moment could help us. So I'm going to do my level best to make sure that neighborhood services are the last things that we cut. But based on the numbers I'm looking at, I'm concerned that we will not be able to avoid reductions to neighborhood services.
Thanks.
Mayor, piggybacking on the budget issues with the city, you reiterated your support for the 5 Big Moves plan at the State of the City, and there's obviously a lot of support, particularly for the airport transit plan. Everybody's been asking for that for years. However, it wasn't lost on our readers, some of our readers, that you arrived at the speech in an SUV that you presumably drove on a highway to get there. So with the budget challenges, and with the new technology, the big car makers promising semi-autonomous vehicles in the near future, and with so many of us already working from home as we are right now, have you changed your views on what the future transportation is going to look like in San Diego?
Not exactly. I mean, first off, I think one of the things that's important for folks like me, and now as a board member at SANDAG, it becomes my responsibility to articulate what the 5 big moves are. And first off is where it's at, right? We are currently reviewing it, right? It hasn't been adopted yet. It's not in its final form. So to your most immediate question, it's possible that it could be modified based on recent experiences. I do think that we have to be cautious about making major modifications, recognizing that the pandemic is not a permanent state. And I liken it to some who thought we wouldn't build skyscrapers after 9/11, and that did not come to pass, right? It isn't to say that human behavior wouldn't change. I do suspect more people who have the luxury of working from home will continue to want to do that. But that doesn't mean they're never going to leave their home. And in some ways, if you're not using your car every day to commute to and from work, you might be more apt to get rid of it and then hope that you have the kinds of walking, bicycling, and mass transit options that are provided. I think, and also under the banner of educating about what the 5 big moves are, I've heard some who have, I think, traditionally not been super big fans of public transit, really focus on the transit component of the 5 big moves, ignoring that 21st century technology is one of the 5 big moves. It's the next operating system that really envisions, your phone being able to call up the appropriately sized transportation mobility option to you for whatever trip you're doing based on the length and duration of that trip. So I think we'll continue I think we'll take 2021 to continue to refine and enhance the plan, hopefully adopt it as a SANDAG board. And then we're going to spend the next number of decades trying to implement it. And that my support for it is really predicated on the notion that if we don't start acting now, we're not going to get the world-class transportation system that we need to be economically competitive for decades. Even if we do act now, it's going to take a while, but you understand the urgency of what I'm articulating. At the end of the day, as I said in the speech, I think this is an opportunity for job creation. It's an opportunity for meeting our climate goals. It's an opportunity to meet our housing goals. And without the 5 big moves, I'm concerned about whether or not we can address our housing crisis, which, absent the pandemic and the resulting economic crisis, is the biggest issue in the city. And when I talk to San Diegans about the need to build more housing, their answer very commonly is, where's the infrastructure? And in many ways, the 5 big moves is our answer to that. And that's why I'm so supportive of it.
And just to follow, can we be assured that one of the big concerns, particularly in the transportation part of all this, is that we're creating a multi-tier system that isn't going to be fair to everybody. Some people will be arriving in SUVs used on highways that they paid a toll to take, and others will be arriving on their bicycle or on mass transit. So what degree of focus is put on equity and how this is all going together?
A lot. And actually, this Friday, the San Diego board is going to adopt an equity policy trying to address that. And Andrew, if I may, our current situation is horribly inequitable. There is only one good option for the vast majority of trips in San Diego today, and that's a car. And to your point about the state of the city, which I point out, that's a police vehicle. And I'm a bit of a control freak, so I would prefer to just drive myself places, but that's not, the chief's not down with that. So here we are with that vehicle. But the system that we have built doesn't provide any doesn't provide a time or cost competitive alternative to that trip. And the 5 big moves is about changing that. It's about giving real choice. And I think equity is about providing choices to people. And it has the happy coincidence of advancing our needs around climate, around infrastructure, around housing to do this. Andrew, I worry about the state of our economy long-term if we cannot build the transportation system that we need to attract and retain jobs and employers here in San Diego. And this is a key component for doing that. And it's just going to take a long time. And, the temptation is always to delay. San Diego is very famous at just delaying stuff until it never happens. I'm trying to insert some urgency on this, recognizing that things like the Mid-Coast trolley extension is something we've been discussing for over 20 years. And if we continue on that path, we won't have another trolley expansion for another 20 years. To put that in perspective, I'd be close to retirement at that point. That is not a recipe for winning the future. That is not a strategy for us being economically competitive. We have to get much more aggressive. And that's one of the things about the 5 big moves I like. It is extremely aggressive. And I think it matches the times that we find ourselves in.
Thank you.
It's been 10 years since the Census Bureau put out a report that said California is the epicenter of poverty in America because of the high cost of housing. And there's been almost no progress on housing, despite the fact that other countries have shown how to do things, having dormitory style housing, using prefab homes, using containers. Why can't we have progress? Why is there so little progress on this issue that is, as you just said a while ago, is the biggest in California and the biggest in San Diego?
Well, the answer is we can, but I think increasingly there's the political will to do it. My election to the office of mayor was very much about the housing issue. And not to be boastful, but it wasn't close, right? I was asked the other day, are you concerned about NIMBYs relative to your positions and ideas on how you can increase housing production? And my answer was, no, I'm more concerned about the majority of San Diegans who can't afford to live here holding me accountable for doing nothing on this issue. And I think that those who are most concerned about housing projects in their community typically are hard to find after the project's completed because they like what's done. In my own neighborhood of Mission Hills, many of you were working for the paper when One Mission was suggested at the corner of Washington and Goldfinch. It was a very controversial project. Fast forward today, absent the pandemic, those restaurants would be full and people love that particular project. And that really informs my support for housing, recognizing that people fear change. I get that. I like patterns and I like keeping a schedule. I'm not particularly fond of changing my own personal life. I get it. But in this regard, the fear of change that people often express to me is something that we can address successfully going forward. Chris, to your question about innovation in this space, I wholeheartedly agree. You may know that we have a number of prefabricated projects that are at least in the works. Probably the most promising of which is a project out in the El Cerrito College Avenue area, a partnership with family health centers that would be quite a few units above a new health center in that community. So you're starting to see signs of life. I think my value add in this is really being extremely clear with everyone. We have to build more housing. That line was in the speech last week for a reason. I think for too long, people have said, our solution to homelessness is X, Y, and Z. Believe me, it's a complex problem, but at the end of the day, if we had a lot more housing that people could afford, there'd be a lot fewer homeless people. There'd be a lot less millennials living at home. There'd be a lot less grandparents having to fly to see their grandkids because they still lived here. Beyond the leadership piece of saying expressly during the campaign, I believe we have to build more housing by as now the mayor, making that clear in my statements about who I'm concerned about, holding me accountable. Again, it's the people who our housing economy is failing, who is the concern I have. The next is how you actually implement it. And you're going to see some policies coming from our shop to try and move the needle on this. Chris, I know we sometimes have a disagreement over subsidized housing, but my focus, and I want to be really clear, is the unsubsidized housing. We don't have enough money around here. I was just sharing with Abby a moment ago. We don't have enough money here to meet our budget, to balance our budget without reductions this coming year. There's no way we can solve the housing crisis. And the unmet need where I see it is the people who don't earn enough to live in the stuff we're currently producing, but make too much to qualify for the programs the city currently has. So that necessitates implementation of policies that would build housing that is naturally affordable. And so to your point about prefabricated housing, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, row homes, townhomes, that kind of product we need more of in San Diego. And we have to align our policies to do that. We have to work with the council to accomplish that. And the last piece where I can be helpful in this is the fact that I get to oversee a development services department that provides the permits to build housing in San Diego. I've met with the director. She's dynamic. She's terrific. And she's heard from me very clearly. I want you to be innovative. I want your staff to be accountable. I want them to say yes to projects and to get these things going. And that recognizing that I will have their back because I think a lot of them are fearful of signing off on new innovative projects that could help address our housing crisis because they're afraid they might make a mistake and therefore lose their job. If you break the law, you will be held accountable. If you're not using basic common sense, you'll be held accountable. But if you are following the rules, if you're using common sense, and if you're doing something that's in the best interest of the city, I will back up my employees. And if we make a mistake, we will correct it and we'll explain to the public how we won't do it again. I think these are all critical for addressing our housing crisis.
I've talked to legislators and legislative aides over the years, and they say that the hidden factor in the housing debate that is rarely brought up is the fact that construction trade unions oppose many innovations, and trade unions and unions in general in California have enormous power. So I just wish that we had more candor from people in talking about how this issue plays out. We have housing units that cost $800,000 in Northern California for studios. And why do we do this? You know, I just think that we're not being candid about the political influences being brought to bear on this debate.
Well, I think you're referring to subsidized.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be candid with you, Chris, that hasn't, when dealing with the trades, it's often on big projects and on large infrastructure, public works, things of that nature. There is involvement with projects that have public subsidy. But as I mentioned to you a moment ago, what I'm focused on is naturally affordable housing that doesn't require a public subsidy.
Thanks, Mayor.
Mayor, can I bring you back to police? I know that Faulkner created this a neighborhood policing division to focus in particularly on homelessness and quality of life issues. I'm glad to hear that you, like others, like our board, think that police should maybe take a back seat to mental health experts when dealing with the homeless. But my specific question for you is, what will you be? Will you keep or eliminate that division? What are your plans for that?
So I don't have an answer for you at the moment, Matt. And so for two reasons. One is I'm being briefed soon on that department. It doesn't, on its face, it doesn't align with my overall objection of making sure we're leading with non-law enforcement when it comes to our unsheltered population. That said, two things come to mind. One is that there certainly are crimes that are perpetrated by all kinds of people, including unsheltered people. And so there has to be a response for that. And currently that's the only response we generally have. I mean, the city has a contract with PATH to do additional street outreach, working closely with Supervisor Nathan Fletcher on mobile crisis response teams that would be social workers and clinicians to do this work rather than law enforcement. I guess what I'm saying is this: the second concern I have is completely backing away and having no interaction while we stand up some other efforts. To my understanding, the neighborhood MPD does provide non-incarcerative services. I don't know if that's the right word. They currently do serve as connectors to social services. And so backing that away and not having anything to put forward in its place, I think would be a mistake. And the mobile crisis response teams require meet and confer. There are some other issues that are there, so we can't do it overnight. I'm hopeful that, and this is part of the meeting with the governor later today, and potentially anything we get out of the feds, if we get flexible enough homeless services funding, we can do more of what we need to. I'll give you an example of what I'm interested in. Price Charities, this would be something that maybe someone can root around on, has had a pilot out in the City Heights area for street outreach for homeless individuals. And it's a modest effort, but it's showing great promise. Scaling that to a citywide level would be, I think, ideal. And how we go about doing that with our current funding circumstances becomes difficult. Simply leaving people out to themselves on the streets, whether for whatever personal harm that may come to them by being unsheltered, or to the extent they could be engaging in behavior that we need to respond to, that we get calls from citizens about, residents about. That's the tension that's there. I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're exploring it. Obviously, you have a fundamental disagreement with the former mayor about. Obviously, you hired Matthew Doherty to come in. He's been very critical of the way Kevin Faulconer cited homelessness and went after the homeless people, kind of with a carrot and stick approach. It seems like you're more of a carrot guy. But I guess so. A quick follow up then.
Yeah.
Have you talked earlier to Laura's question about the police chief? Have you given him guidance to cite homeless people less? What have you told him in terms of what can the city expect in terms of the notion that Faulconer in some ways the perception was he criminalized homelessness.
Yeah.
I don't think he would say that.
Right. He wouldn't.
But he cited homeless people much more than other mayors had.
Yeah. No, the chief well understands my outlook on this issue, providing the opportunity to sit with the officers that do this work and understand how they may do that work is important. Matt, one of the things I think this has been my life's work. I've spent most of my career working on housing and homelessness issues, and one consistency in this space is, I like to think of it as like the traffic light issue when it comes to homelessness. You put a traffic light, there's a panhandler there, your car stereo becomes the center of your world, right? You just want to focus on that and ignore it until the light changes. There's a dynamic of that at play here, right? If we back off one particular city service without the engagement of something else, you end up with that traffic light experience, which is consigning people to living on the streets indefinitely. And so we do have to have regular contact. A lot of times people tell me, oh, those folks want to be homeless. No, they don't. There's experiencing significant mental illness and other challenges that the way you get around is through continual contact, building of rapport and trust to the point that they eventually say yes to services. And so at least at this point in time, I am uncomfortable with law enforcement being our primary point of contact for our unsheltered people. We need to transition that to something that is not law enforcement. Small asterisk, some of these individuals can be a bit dangerous. And so sending a clinician without proper protection would not be ideal or advisable. So again, balancing that is an issue. But at the end of the day, wholesale turning off the current approach while we stand up something else is not something I'm comfortable with. And what we have to do is make sure that we're being as humane as possible in our current interactions, that we're connecting people with services, and ultimately doing that with clinicians and social workers who are trained to do this, and allowing our law enforcement officers to focus on what they should be doing, which is preventing and reacting to crime. when you look at our murder rate, when you look at some of the gang issues that we have in the city right now, you recognize why every one of those hours of service for law enforcement officers should be focused on that and not on people who are the most vulnerable, the most sick, the poorest in our community. Those people are better served by non-law enforcement officials.
Mr. Mayor,
the answer.
I want to get back to the franchise agreements.
Sure.
I'm so stunned when I read the coverage of this and the city acts like it has some kind of specific leverage. How can you easily supplant an existing utility? How can you believe you have leverage over an existing utility when you're not getting other people coming in to bid? I looked around the state of California. I find no example of cities pressuring utilities into giving them really good deals. So I just wonder, why do you guys think you have some kind of leverage here?
Because the value of it is in the billions.
But how can you easily replace them?
Well, it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be easy today. I mean, there wouldn't necessarily be easy to municipalize or replace. The ITB that was drafted by the previous administration obviously elicited just one bidder. That will not be the ITB that we issue in the coming months after the public process. Could we draft one that might get additional bidders? It's possible. But at the end of the day, the franchise is worth billions of dollars, and the ability to have a partner help us to provide energy to the city of San Diego is lucrative enough to get outcomes that are in the best interest of the city and our residents. So it isn't that there's a ton of people out there that can do this work. Obviously, it's complex. It requires a level of expertise that not just anybody can do. But the dollars that are involved in this means that it's worth the time and effort to make sure we get this right, and that we have a partner that is doing what we need them to do, not just in terms of advancing our climate goals and looking at the city's bottom line, but in respecting our infrastructure and advancing key projects in the community, helping us to provide equity when it comes to sustainability. There's a number of ways that we should use the franchise agreement to receive the outcomes that are in the best interest of the city. And to answer your question, Chris, the profit that is there to be made through this agreement is ultimately the leverage that we have, in addition to the potential of reclaiming and municipalizing or giving it to another vendor.
But there's nowhere else.
That. Go ahead.
Sorry,
what was
ahead,
that, Chris?
Just piggybacking on that same question, we've been paying into SDG&E for a long time for undergrounding our power lines. And there was some indication SDG&E could kind of hold that over our heads as, oh, well, those things just won't happen now. We've already paid for this stuff. How can we guarantee that the work that's been begun is going to continue and will reach its completion?
Well, that was why the extension of the current franchise agreement was important. To make sure that much of that work continues, and this is where I should say, to date we have worked well. My administration and SDG&E, whether it was with the short-term extension of the agreement, the continuation of current payments, the ongoing undergrounding projects. I mean, I think the answer, at least for you right now, Andrew, is yes. If there were to be a change, that's going to have to be contemplated there. But ultimately, those are dollars, as you mentioned, that have been provided by the ratepayers of San Diego. And, with an extension of the current agreement, a new agreement, we will make sure that those dollars continue to go into the community. But again, that was why the extension what was necessary to make sure that certainty of process continues for the surcharge program, which, as you mentioned, San Diegans are paying for.
Can I ask you a couple of quick timing questions before, in the interest of time, we turn the mic over to my colleagues for any last questions.
Sure.
Just so really quickly, the Race and Equity Director, when do you expect to have someone in place? We have the recruiting firm. We have put out the solicitation. I think you're talking probably, I'm going to say April would be my guess. Okay, so not too far away. Great.
Not too far.
And sports arena, what are your plans for that? What kind of timeline are we talking about? And are you going to start a new process or go with the former mayor's options?
I'm committed to negotiating with the current team that the previous mayor went with. You know, if we can't come to an agreement, we can just rebid it. But you know, they are currently working with the community to kind of identify what their project would look like with the certainty provided by Measure E and city policies like complete communities, et cetera. I think they understand now what is possible on that site. Question is, you know, what works well with their investors? What can the community support? What can Council President Campbell support? And what will I support? So answer your question, Matt, we're going to continue to negotiate with them. And I've made clear to them, you know, I'd like to see a new arena. I would like to see housing that is attainable, to Chris's point a moment ago, for average San Diegans. They need to address the infrastructure issues there. You know, it is transit oriented, but it's still a ways away from the Old Town Trolley Station, and addressing how you get people to and from that station is key. And lastly, and this sounds frivolous, but it is important to me, it has to be world-class design. You know, the days of San Diego settling for something less than is not acceptable to this administration. That is a key piece of property. That is a major project, and it should be emblematic of the big city I know that we can be, rather than settling for just something mediocre, because that's what we have to do to get a deal done.
It's a good answer. Is there a timeline for San Diegans to see what this looks like, or TBD?
It's TBD. I mean, this is we have a bit more time. The one that has a bit more of a rush on it is the Tailgate Park. As a former redevelopment property, there's some more pressures of time. So I've actually spent a bit more time on that particular project, respecting the public process that's happening at Sports Arena. But I think you'll have some certainty. You'll have some certainty in 2021 about whether we'll continue engaging with the current team or go with somebody else. Or restart that process, I should say. Restart that process.
Thanks. And then last question from me. 101 Ash Street obviously was a big part of the mayoral debate, which, as you pointed out, was won handily, even though you didn't mean to boast, I think was your term. What can we expect on that? Twofold. Will there be more investigations? Is it just in the court realm now, in terms of what happened, and going forward, what's going to happen to that building?
Yeah, that is a TBD, at least at this point. I don't take any glee in telling you that. I was kind of hoping that I could give you, when envisioning this conversation probably happening sometime early in the administration, that we'd have enough in time to give you a path forward. The fact is, Matt, is that a lot's happened in the 4 years since I've been here. What I've been briefed on to date is interesting in the standpoint that a lot of decisions were made. I think chief among them, the desire to modify the building and expose the asbestos. The previous administration threw a lot of money and a lot of consultants at the situation, at the problem. And at least to date, we still don't have firm numbers that anyone will stand behind in terms of what it would take to modify the building such that it could be occupied again. At the same time, we do have active litigation on this, both against us and against others. And so, these two issues are going to have to kind of play out a little bit more before I can come back. And I'm happy to make the commitment to you that when we have something specific that we can share, I would appreciate the opportunity to come and explain it to the editorial board. This is not going to be something that can be explained in a couple of sound bites. But we will continue to do the due diligence. I'm a little reluctant on spending a lot more consultant money, given the volume of which has already been spent on this without satisfactory answers. And so understanding precisely what we need to get to be able to give the council the option of saying, we can do this or we can do that, which do you want, is something I don't have today. But when we do, again, I would appreciate the opportunity to come back and explain it to you. We're going to have to do a lot to regain the trust of the public when it comes to the way the city has procured properties. And a side note on that, Matt, we have closed the recruitment for a new real estate assets director. We'll begin the interview process soon for that. And that individual is going to be obviously key in resolving not just this issue, but a number of other real estate issues, big and small, that are still simmering, left over from the previous administration.
That's good to hear too. Any of my colleagues have a last question or two for Todd?
I did want to ask you, Mayor, I know we have so many questions and not enough time with you, but just really quickly, what is the relationship like so far with the mayor in Tijuana, with Gonzalez Cruz? I know you've only done one short meeting, but what do you feel that relationship should be, especially with COVID in the South Bay and the border issue, the sewage issue that just, like you said earlier, just keeps going on and on and on?
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, we knew each other from before this. He was extremely generous and called me the day after the election to congratulate me. We've had the meeting, as you mentioned. I think absent the pandemic, we would have had multiple in-person meetings at this point. But obviously, we need to abide by the health order. I'm hopeful, and I want to be clear in saying that I see the mayor of San Diego's job as requiring a lot, not just the interaction with Tijuana, but of being a vocal proponent of immigration and border issues. I'm actually participating in a panel discussion this Saturday at the U.S. Conference of Mayors Convention, virtual, to try and articulate those points. And I see the relationship with both the mayor and Governor Bonilla as being critical, not just in getting through the pandemic, but also in these infrastructure projects to ease the flow back and forth to addressing the Tijuana River Valley. If I can bring up another relationship that's also important, and I think is a difference that this editorial board would appreciate, is with the county. I can't tell you the number of meetings I've had with Supervisor Fletcher since my swearing in 42 days ago. In, I think, the 2 weeks that Nora Vargas has been in office, I've met with her, I think, nearly half a dozen times. I have my first meeting with Tara Lawson-Remer today, and we would have did it sooner, but she's been busy. My point is that I think for all of us, we've long understood that despite the political alignment between the city and the county in recent years, there has not been the relationship that there ought to be between these two agencies. And this is more critical than ever with the pandemic, but it's going to be particularly important going forward on a number of the issues we've talked about, homelessness, energy, housing, and transportation. And so I think this stronger relationship is one that's really important. It's off to an extremely good start. If we can make some progress on those mental health clinicians, that's a short-term thing. If we can maybe come together under a CCA that the county would join, that would be good. I mean, there's a host of ways that this more functional relationship between the city and the county will accrue to the benefit of the people of this region. And I'm really excited about that. But I don't mean to digress off the question about Tijuana and Arturo, but it's a good one. He's extremely kind. I mean, he's the seasoned hand, right? So he was giving me some good advice, which I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, did you know that you were born the exact same day as Kenan Thompson, the longest serving cast member on Saturday Night Live?
Actually, I did know that. I believe it's also Bono I share a birthday with, right? And Linda Evangelista, but that's for the gays to know.
Mayor, thanks so much. We want to be mindful of your time. Really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to holding you accountable and having you hold us accountable in your term, and look forward to having you back.
Well, Matt, thank you guys for your time. You guys' time is valuable. And we have some tough stuff we have to do. The only way we can get the public support for it is to be open, honest, transparent, build credibility. I appreciate the chance to do that via this format, and we'll keep doing it.
Thanks so much, Mayor.
All right, thank you guys. Have a great day.